What you are about to hear are the dark years of Joshua, 18 years erased from history. These are not stories of miracles, but of a young stoneworker confronting the raw, ancient terrors of human evil. From a spectral noose in Jerusalem to a counting down charioteer in the mountains of Galilee. Witness the moment the light first met the abyss. This is the forbidden oral history of the Messiah's youth. Listen closely, for the darkness still remembers. Part 1. The Sepulchre of the Scribe, the Curse of Jerusalem. In the labyrinthine streets of Jerusalem, where the dust of centuries clings to the limestone walls, a young Joshua found work at a massive scriptorium near the temple's shadow. The air inside was thick, not with the sweetness of cedar oil, but with the suffocating scent of stagnant ink and a copper-like tang that smelled of hidden blood. This sanctuary of holy scrolls had recently been seized through predatory debt by a Greco-Roman moneylender named Valerius. The former owner, a righteous scribe who had dedicated his life to the law, had been found swinging from the rafters just weeks prior, his spirit broken by Valerius's calculated cruelty. Joshua stood in the office as Valerius sat draped in expensive Tyrian purple silk, his fingers stained with the ink of forged contracts. He spoke of optimizing the holy texts, intending to use the cheapest, thinnest vellum to maximize his silver. Joshua did not look at the merchant's gloating face. Instead, his eyes were fixed on the empty space behind the high-backed chair. There, visible only to him, a spectral noose made of thick, suffocating black miasma hovered. It was woven from the final desperate gasps of the dead scribe. With every breath Valerius took to boast of his prophet, the noose tightened, its ethereal fibers vibrating with a low, mournful hum. Joshua's voice cut through the merchant's laughter like a hammer striking an anvil. You wrap your greed in the sacred words of the Creator, thinking the parchment can shield your soul. But these very letters shall become the links of a chain that drags you into the abyss. He who hangs the righteous with the rope of debt shall find his own breath stolen in the sanctuary of his wealth. Valerius felt a sudden, inexplicable chill, a weight pressing against his windpipe. 2 months later, in a room locked from the inside, Valerius was found dead. His face was a bruised indigo, his eyes bulging in a final silent scream. There was no rope found, yet his neck bore the deep charred indentations of a noose that did not belong to this world. Part 2. The Crimson Sandals of Jericho, the Hunger of the Well. As the sun began to bleed over the jagged peaks of the Judean wilderness, Joshua arrived at a sprawling villa in the Jericho oasis. The master of the house was a man of immense hollow wealth, a man who had built his empire by intercepting exhausted travelers and selling them into the brutal silver mines of the east. The villa was beautiful, yet a shroud of unnatural coldness hung over its sun-drenched courtyard. The servants spoke in whispers of the tall woman, an entity that emerged from the depths of the ancient courtyard well whenever the moon was eclipsed. Joshua walked to the well's edge. The water below was pitch black, and from its depths rose a stench of mud and ancient rot. He saw her, a pale, elongated figure clinging to the stones below. Her limbs were distorted, her skin translucent and crawling with white maggots that fed on her eternal sorrow. Her right arm had been hacked off at the shoulder, a jagged stump that leaked a black, oily substance. She was a servant girl, murdered by the master's father decades ago and discarded like refuse. As Joshua watched, a pair of vibrant crimson sandals, dyed in a red so deep it pulsed like a heartbeat, appeared on the well's edge. They were a soul trap, meant to lure the master's innocent daughter into the water so the entity could take her feet and walk the earth once more. Joshua placed his calloused hand on the freezing stone, his internal light flaring like a localized sun. The entity shrieked, a sound like grinding teeth. Ka-ka-ka. Joshua did not flinch. He looked into the dark water and proclaimed, "The cruelty of man has turned this source of life into a hammo, a sepulchre of bitterness. You build your paradise on white bone, thinking the earth will forget. But every stone has ears, and every drop of blood has a voice that cries to the heavens for justice." That night the sky turned a bruised purple. A fire of unnatural origin erupted from the well, the flames licking the sky without consuming the trees. The master was found at the bottom of his own well the next morning, his lungs filled with silt, while the crimson sandals turned to gray ash in the daughter's hand. Part 3. The Countdown of the Charioteer. On the jagged, wind-swept peaks of the Galilee range, a young Joshua traveled with a carpenter named Caleb. Caleb was a man of broken spirit, his left leg mangled in teoquap, withered. trailing behind him with a heavy rhythmic thud against the frozen earth. As a sudden violent dust storm blinded their path, the sound of thundering hooves emerged from the haze. A magnificent white chariot appeared, driven by a man whose silk robes defied the biting wind. His smile was warm, radiant, and seemingly holy. Yet the moment Caleb saw him, he collapsed into the snow, his body seizing in a paroxysm of pure primal terror. That night, huddled in a shallow cave, Caleb whispered the secret that had haunted his dreams for a decade. Years ago, this charioteer had led a hidden ring of human traffickers, preying on the desperate and the lost. Caleb had discovered their trade and tried to intervene, only to be lured onto a chariot for a negotiation. As the vehicle reached the highest, most precarious cliff of the pass, the driver let go of the reins. He turned to Caleb with eyes that were hollow, black voids, and began a cold rhythmic countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. At 0, the chariot plunged into the ravine. The driver was crushed instantly, yet here he was again, reborn with the same face, the same chariot, and the same terrifying smile, waiting to claim Caleb once more. Joshua rose and stepped out into the howling gale, facing the phantom charioteer who sat motionless in the storm. The young stoneworker's presence seemed to anchor the very mountain. He spoke with a voice that resonated with the authority of the Creator. You are the repetition of ancient malice, a ghost fed by the fear of those you destroyed. You count down the lives of men because you are terrified of the eternity that awaits you. Your cycle is broken. Every number you utter from this breath forward shall be a hammer blow shattering your own soul into the dust. The driver's jaw locked. His countdown turned into a silent, frozen scream as his chariot dissolved into rotted wood and gray ash. Joshua turned to Caleb, placing a hand on his withered knee. The shadow only has power when you allow it to narrate your future. The countdown has ended. Part 4. The Bread of Ashes. In the salt-crusted air of Magdala, a young Joshua was approached by a blind beggar who handed him a scrap of parchment. The paper was charred at the edges and smelled of ozone and ancient burnt wheat. It bore a single jagged line. The oven is hot, the bread is sweet, only the murderer is missing from the feast. Joshua followed the scent of ghostly smoke to a blackened ruin on the edge of the sea, a bakery that had once been the heart of the community before it was consumed by an inferno 10 years prior. Inside, amidst the charcoal beams, Joshua saw the apparitions of a woman and 2 children. They were composed entirely of white ash, silently kneading dough made of gray cinders, their movements fluid yet devoid of life. The tragedy of this house was a secret everyone knew, but no one dared speak. A local elder, driven by a thirst for the bakery's valuable seaside land, had locked the doors from the outside and set the building ablaze on a night of celebration. As Joshua stood among the ruins, that very elder, now a man of immense political power, passed by with a retinue of guards. He stopped to mock the young worker, laughing at the filth of the ruins. Joshua didn't argue. He simply held out the parchment scrap. The feast is ready, elder. Your portion has been waiting for a long time. As the elder's fingers brushed the parchment, it burst into a cold blue flame that did not burn the paper, but began to melt the man's skin like wax. The ash figures in the bakery turned their hollow, sightless eyes toward him. The elder screamed as the very air around him turned into thick, suffocating smoke. Joshua's voice rang out, heavy with the weight of divine judgment. You used fire to steal the lives of the innocent. Now that fire shall dwell within your marrow, where no water can reach and no mercy can quench it. Your wealth is built on cinders, and to the cinders you shall return. The elder collapsed, his body turning to dry, brittle charcoal in a matter of seconds, while the scent of fresh bread finally replaced the smell of death in the Magdala breeze. Part 5. The Garden of the Betrayed. In the Romanized city of Sepphoris, Joshua worked under a master mason named Simon, a man whose heart was as clear as the springs of Hermon. Simon had poured his soul into the palace's central courtyard, planting a sacred fig tree in its center to symbolize peace. However, the palace was a nest of vipers. A group of officials, led by a ruthless eunuch named Claudius, had embezzled the gold meant for the courtyard's fountains and framed Simon for the theft. They humiliated him publicly, stripping him of his dignity before sentencing him to the agonizing slow death of the salt mines. The night before the guards were to take him, Simon used his own measuring rope to hang himself from the very fig tree he had nurtured. When Joshua arrived at dawn, he saw Simon's spirit, not as a peaceful ghost, but as a silent sentinel of vengeance, his bruised eyes fixed on the palace balconies. Over the next moon, the garden became a place of execution. Claudius, while walking the balcony, saw Simon's face in the leaves. He shrieked, stepped back, and fell 30 feet, his neck snapping upon the same roots where Simon had died. One by one, the conspirators felt an invisible rope tightening around their own throats whenever they entered the garden. Joshua stood in the center of the cursed garden, facing the spirit of his friend. The air was thick with the rot of unreleased hatred. "Simon," Joshua said softly, "your vengeance has turned this sanctuary into a slaughterhouse. You have killed your enemies, but look at your hands. They have become as dark as the hearts of those you hate." The spirit of the mason trembled, the fig tree's leaves turning black at Joshua's words. Joshua stepped forward and touched the withered trunk. "Man's betrayal is a poison, but your hatred is the cup that drinks it. Let the architect of the universe judge the living. You must seek the peace of the silent stone." The tree shattered into dust, and the spectral rope vanished. Simon's spirit dissolved into a mist of light, leaving the palace officials who survived to live in a perpetual, waking nightmare of the justice they had tried to bury. Joshua walked the darkest paths of the Levant, not to witness evil, but to master it. These chronicles remind us that every secret act leaves a permanent scar on the fabric of eternity. The darkness you've heard of today isn't just history, it's a mirror. Subscribe and stay vigilant. In our next chapter, we descend into the secrets of the temple tombs, where the young Messiah faces an entity that has waited in the dark since the dawn of time. Would you like me to continue the story?